A young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
After weeks of intense conflict, the United States and Iran have agreed to a tentative 2-week ceasefire. But already, the truce seems to be unraveling. Israel has launched its largest coordinated strikes on Lebanon since the war began. Tehran is calling the attacks a clear violation of the ceasefire agreements and has once again shut down the Strait of Hormuz and is warning of what it calls a regret-inducing response if the strikes do not stop immediately. So is the planned meeting in Islamabad, Pakistan still on track or now at risk? How does Israel's defiance complicate Washington's position? And with the deal showing cracks before talks have even begun, is a durable agreement between the U.S. and Iran still within reach? To unpack all these questions and beyond, we're joined in Washington, D.C. by Anton Fedyashin, Associate Professor at the American University, and in our Beijing studio by John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. Professor Gong, let me go to you first. Iran's foreign minister has spoken about Arachi condemning the Israeli strikes on Lebanon that killed at least 182 people. And the foreign minister writes on social media, the U.S.-Iran ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The U.S. must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. So help us understand the situation here. You've been studying and working in Israel for the longest time. What is Israeli mentality? What is Iranian mentality at this point?
Well, I guess there's some confusion over the scope of the ceasefire. And if you read President Trump's post on Truth Social, it's pretty clear that he's referring to Iran. He's saying that the United States, together with the countries at stake in the Middle East, is going to have a ceasefire with Iran. That's the original wording, interpretation of original wording. Nevertheless, I think the Iranian side is interpreting this as a ceasefire for the entire war. And of course, including the ceasefire in Lebanon, right? In Lebanon, Israel is actually waging a war in southern Lebanon. And also it's reported that the Israeli side also said it very clearly that, this deal reached between Washington and Tehran is all about Iran. It's nothing to do with southern Lebanon. So this is Israeli position. So here you go, the Israeli side is continuing this war in Lebanon. So I think this is a big confusion about, from public's point of view, the confusion about the terms of this ceasefire. Tehran is saying that it includes the entire ceasefire. Obviously, Israeli side doesn't agree with that. So I think, the public never knows about the exact terms of the ceasefire. So we don't know about this. Who is actually telling the truth? Who is not telling the truth? But nevertheless, I think in this spirit, it's really important on the Israeli side to stop this war. Even if the ceasefire is reached between the United States and Tehran, is all about Iran. Still, I think it's imperative to stop fighting here. From my personal perspective, I think this war needs to stop, and there's no reason for Israel to continue the fighting in Lebanon. If we're going to have ceasefire, we have a ceasefire. There shouldn't be a sort of a convoluted interpretation of a ceasefire.
You're right. The ceasefire looks increasingly fragile. If you look at Iran's foreign minister Arachi's tweet, if you look at it carefully, the foreign minister claims that the ball is now in the U.S. courts and the world is watching. There you go. Whether it will act on its commitments. Anton, let me go to you. Some argue that such back and forth is some kind of threshold testing of Iran. What is your take on this? Do you think Iran can just let Lebanon go, its important ally Hezbollah in the region, or how fragile is this ceasefire really?
One, I think it's a very fragile ceasefire. That's very clear, I think, to everyone. But I think there's an even more fundamental issue here, two issues. Number one is how this ceasefire was agreed to begin with. We know pretty much that there have been no direct talks between the United States and Iran. We know that the negotiations about this ceasefire, the details have been carried through an intermediary, that being Pakistan, of course. And it's not just the Iranians, but it's also the Pakistanis who have made absolutely clear through public channels that a ceasefire in Lebanon was part of the original deal. But the problem is that there were no direct diplomatic talks by professionals between the two sides, and therefore it's a given that there will be many misunderstandings. That's why sitting down face to face and conducting direct talks really ought to be the way to solve this. That's one of the two big issues. The second big issue, of course, is the distinction between the United States and Israel, because they are on the same side when it comes to the war against Iran, but they are at the same time two distinct players. And the Iranians are in a very difficult position right now because although they may believe that they have struck a deal with the United States about the 2-week ceasefire, they have not struck a deal with the Israelis, directly or indirectly, to the best of our knowledge. And therefore, while the U.S. may suspend direct hostilities against Iran, Israel has every incentive not to abide by this, because Benjamin Netanyahu, who, according to a huge New York Times article that everyone here in Washington is talking about today, who was the one who brought the United States into this war by convincing Donald Trump in February on the 11th, if we are to believe the secret meeting that took place here in Washington. He convinced the Americans that this will be an easy war. Donald Trump chose to believe him, even though U.S. intelligence warned him that it won't be. And the Israelis have not achieved any of their fundamental aims. Therefore, it is in their interest to try to undermine the current ceasefire by simply continuing to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon. And I'll bet you anything that in the next 24 to 48 hours, the Israelis will probably attempt to strike Iran directly again. And so not only is this a fragile ceasefire, it is unclear whether all of the parties to the war have actually agreed to it.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for breaking it all down for us, Professor Fedyashin. Now, Iran threatened a regret-inducing response if Israel continues to attack Lebanon. Iran made it very clear. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has fired rockets at Israel in response. Professor Gong, how do you see the situation evolving between Israel and Lebanon, which is turning out to be another very important piece of the puzzle?
Well, I totally agree that Israel at this point has no incentive to stop fighting in southern Lebanon. I mean, it's very clear their aim is to totally eliminate the fighting capabilities of the Hezbollah over there. And they're still far away from that. I mean, if you look at the reports of what's happening on the ground right now, and they have an incentive to continue fighting. I think the issue really is whether, in the context that the Israeli interest and American interest are not totally and completely aligned at this stage of the war, the issue, it begs the question whether Washington has any control of Jerusalem. You know, this is a big issue here. And I totally agree that at this point, Israel has an incentive to undermine the ceasefire by continuing fighting in southern Lebanon, but may also by hitting targets in Iran again. And there's some reports actually already reporting that something like that has already happened. So I think this is really a test on the resolve of Washington, whether it does have any say and any control of decision-making in Jerusalem. I think the Missouri side would probably, if you look at the public statements by Bibi Netanyahu, he goes out and saying that we are fighting together with America, we're totally aligned together, we have common interests, blah, blah, blah. But behind the scene, I think he's probably doing something totally in conflict with what Washington is trying to achieve at this point in the war.
I mean, that really leads to my next question. I mean, Professor Fedyashin, to what extent can Donald Trump and this very small team who decided to launch the attack in the first place really ring in Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis at this point?
Unfortunately for Donald Trump, by the way, they cannot. And the Trump administration has no one but itself to blame, although it is acting in a very important context, which is the general enormous influence of the Israeli government over all American administrations, except that under Trump, this influence, of course, is greater than ever before. Israel has a very powerful lobby in the United States. This is absolutely no secret. Not only articles, but very good books have been written about this. The most important one, I guess, is by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, but it's one of many. And the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, which operates in the open and perfectly legally, is one of the most influential lobbies in the United States. This is why, without a formal alliance, the United States and Israel have really been joined at the hip, especially since the mid-1970s. Most American administrations, most presidential administrations, and this is a bipartisan issue, in other words, it applies to both Democratic and Republican administrations, have always been very close to Israel geopolitically. Israel has been a very reliable ally to the United States in the Middle East. But that alliance works in both directions. Not only does it provide the United States with a reliable local military base, essentially, but it also gives Israel enormous influence over the United States. This has become even more so since Donald Trump came to office because of how influential AIPAC money, the American-Israeli lobby, has been in getting him elected. The problem is that while previous presidents have managed to somehow resist that lobby, Donald Trump seems to have completely fallen for Benjamin Netanyahu's case to convince him that the attack on Iran will be lightning fast, will achieve results very quickly. And this becomes a really very important question about the quality of Mossad information, because along with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House meeting, which happened on February 11th, at least according to New York Times, was the head of the Israeli Mossad. And both Netanyahu and the head of Mossad were convincing Trump that Iran's government is on its last legs, that all it needs is a slight push. And once a short bombing campaign begins and the Ayatollah is killed, which is exactly, of course, what happened at the beginning of this campaign, the whole house of cards will collapse. And that was a catastrophic misjudgment.
Yeah, I mean, we should not forget the book that you mentioned, the expose book on Israeli lobby in Washington, written by Stephen Walz and John Mearsheimer. We're working on it, by the way. It took a while for the book to be even published in the United States, a country that prides itself on freedom of information. Professor Gong, what do you think?
Well, I agree with our American friend that the AIPAC has a huge influence in Washington. But nevertheless, let me also point out that the public view of Israel is at all-time low right now, and I think especially the case with the younger generation. I think the Israeli lobby in the United States has been operating pretty much in the shadow for a long time, and now it's somehow dragged out by Professor Mearsheimer and his friend under the sun, and people start to realize that. And I think this is the public opinion about Israel, I think, in the United States is at a point of no return, in my view. I think the younger generation is fully aware of this. I mean, look at the public outcry about this war, particularly within the MAGA camp. There are these noticeable conservative opinion leaders like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, and all these people who are typically very conservative, very pro-Republican, are now coming out in public to denounce this war, to disagree with this war. Now, let me also point out that the incident about the TikTok takeover. I mean, in public, they've been saying the TikTok needs to be sold, to be detached from its parent company in China because of China. This is not true, actually. I mean, the true reason, let me tell you the true reason. The true reason of TikTok being forced to make a sale in the United States is precisely because of the rising and widespread speech against Israel regarding the Gaza issue. And the people, in America are very concerned and scared about this, and that's why they're forcing this sale. And you look at what happened after Larry Ellison and his company take over TikTok. The entire speech about the Gaza realities has been totally banned at this point. I mean, this goes to say about the power of the Israeli lobby in the United States and how the public opinion about Israel has totally changed at this point.
Thanks so much for shedding light on this very important issue and this very important illuminating story that you just mentioned. Now, Professor Fedyashin, the White House says Vice President J.D. Vance will lead a delegation to Pakistan starting April the 11th for talks with Iran. But given what happened in the past 24 hours, do you think this meeting can still take place as scheduled?
Well, I think the meeting can always take place. And again, we'll see what happens. But again, let's look at the composition of the team that is supposed to be traveling to Islamabad. We're expecting this to happen by Friday. But again, things are changing so fast that no one actually understands what will happen. But let's say that it takes place. From what I understand, from what's been reported publicly in the United States, that negotiating team is going to be composed of J.D. Vance, but also Jared Kushner, and the other real estate mogul, Trump's friend. That pair have been negotiating with the Iranians before. That's also the team, of course, that's been negotiating with the Russians and the Ukrainians to put an end to that war. The real estate team has absolutely no standing with the Iranians at this point because they were the ones negotiating with them while Israel was attacking Iranian diplomats, and they were the ones who were negotiating with the Iranians when the attack began. J.D. Vance, if he actually accompanies the team to Islamabad, is a different issue. J.D. Vance has been the most prominent member of the Trump administration to be very critical of this operation to begin with. Now, sending him over as part of the negotiation team may work to balance the pro-Israeli versus the skeptical members of Trump's team, but it then becomes unclear to me exactly how the negotiation will work when there is a split within the American team itself. Now, I can understand if some Iranians look at this as another ploy on the part of the Americans to sort of fool them into a sense of false calm, while the United States sort of licks its wounds, rearms, allows Israel to reorganize its military bases before another wave of attack. So let's see what happens. In general, of course, talks, this time direct talks, I can only welcome them. I am just very skeptical and cautiously not optimistic about whether anything will result. But stranger things have happened, certainly during the Trump administration. And so let's give diplomacy a chance, but let's temper our expectations.
Professor Gong, how do you look at the prospect of the U.S.-Iran talk in Islamabad? Should it take place?
Well, I give a 50-50 chance. I totally agree that this is actually a very tough negotiation. I mean, we have to keep in mind that President Trump has questioned the rationality of the Iranian leadership a couple of times in the past. He's questioning why, the Iranian side hasn't really sort of quote, capitulated. But he forgets that he's not dealing with sort of a secular administration. This is a religious group of people, and they are fighting for their cause. They're fighting for their country, and threatening people with sort of death, killing, more assassinating. Actually, I mean, this is actually a violation against the international law. Assassinating state leadership is not going to make people change their mind. I think this is a very, very tough negotiation. And also, interestingly, intriguingly, I would say, there's some reports coming out of the Iranian side that the Pakistani administration hasn't been really relaying messages verbatim. In other words, these are sort of altered messages in favor of moving towards a truce at this point. So, whether the true positions of the respective sides are reflected on each side is actually not known. That adds more difficulty to the negotiation. So I think, I just give it a 50-50 chance. But I think it's quite likelihood that maybe the truce period will be prolonged, maybe adding another week, another 2 weeks, in a way to avoid fighting. But in terms of reaching a complete peace agreement in this issue, I think we are still miles apart, miles away.
Yeah, but what's more certain than not is perhaps the potential U.S. war crimes committed against Iran, against people in the region. More than 100 U.S.-based international legal experts have signed an open letter earlier stating that, and I quote, the initiation of the campaign was a clear violation of the UN Charter and the conduct of the United States forces since, as well as statements made by senior officials, raised serious concerns about violations of international human rights laws and international humanitarian law, including potential war crimes. Professor Fedyashin, which actions, if any, do you think crossed legal boundaries?
Well, I think that if the Iranians manage to convince international institutions, such as the International Criminal Court, to actually do their job objectively and to apply the criteria of war crimes equally to all states, then all attacks against clearly civilian targets that were not being used for military purposes would qualify as war crimes, including, by the way, strikes against desalination plants, not to mention, by the way, the open, written, and in some cases verbal threats. But the chances of that happening are unfortunately very low. And I'm aware, of course, of the letter. This has been done on previous occasions when the United States has gone to war, never with this many experts, but it really hasn't resulted in much. The loss of civilian life as a result of the Iraq War in 2003 is times greater than anything that Iran has so far sustained. And since the United States is not a signatory of the International Criminal Court, nor is Israel, I seriously doubt that the International Criminal Court is going to go after Israeli or American politicians or generals. Even if it did, these questions are fairly time-consuming to prove. There's already an ICC warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu, and it hasn't really created many problems for him traveling abroad. As a matter of fact, some countries that are signatories to the ICC and by law would have to or have had to arrest him and hand him over have simply made exceptions for him during his visit, Hungary being one of them, and that will probably continue. I do not, to be honest with you, foresee any international legal cases actually succeeding, let alone being launched against either the United States or Israel. Except through Middle Eastern states, but ultimately they do not yet have the stature to put pressure on international and Western-controlled organizations.
Now, let me also add one point here. The International Criminal Court has already had a warrant on Bibi Netanyahu, right? The United States is not only not a signatory to this thing, the United States actually threatens International Criminal Court. After the warrant issued against Bibi Netanyahu, there are 8 American senators signed a joint letter. I hope everybody go out and read that letter. It openly threatens the judges in that court and said that there will be consequences, grave consequences, It's nothing more than a farce. Even action was taken by the International Criminal Court. So I think it's not going to happen. If anything, probably the court itself will be on trial by a court in the United States. It's just an irony here.
With that, we come to the close of this edition of The Hub on CGTN. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. I'll see you again soon.
From the refreshing cup of tea that starts your morning to the paper that you write on, the roots of many familiar parts of modern life can be traced back to ancient ideas. Join us on Made in Ancient China and discover how ideas born millennia ago became some of the world's greatest treasures. Made in Ancient China brings you stories of human ambition, inspiration, and connection. Now available on all major podcast platforms.
Shh. Listen up. Can you hear the heartbeat of our world? It's vibrant and pulsating with the essence of life itself. From the stem of trees to the gurgle of rivers. From the silent strength of mountains to the icy whispers of glaciers. Even the solid ground beneath our feet. And right there, in the midst of all, beats the heart of humanity. What if those other heartbeats were to stop? Would ours keep on ticking?